It all started with the World Depression. After World War I, everybody was in debt except for America and Japan. This is because they were remote to the war. All the other battles were fought in Europe. But this left the rest of the world very bankrupt. America was booming economically, but this was about to change. This changed for a few reasons, one of which is the stock market crash. This was caused by people buying stocks on credit and not being able to pay them back. When the stock market crashed, many banks, homes, and offices and businesses were foreclosed. Another problem was that farms were overproducing and couldn't sell all that they made. Because of this, a lot of farms were foreclosed by banks, and the prices of crops raised. And bouncing off of that note, this made the demand lower for everything, so more and more farms were closing and the prices were higher than ever. The United States went into recession. People were losing their homes and losing their families and jobs. Over 33% of the country was out of a job. When things seemed like they couldn't get worse, a giant drought known as the Dust Bowl killed all the crops, or most of the crops, in the middle of America. This raised the price of food even more, and you can imagine how pricey it was now. With nobody having a job and a low demand for food, the United States was officially in a depression. Many people blamed President Hoover's poor decision-making, but this was about to change because they had a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. America needed a Democrat in office. FDR was a cold man all of his life, but after he was struck with polio, he learned to be compassionate towards other people, and this made him a great president. FDR had New Deal programs to help rebalance the economy. These programs would put America back into the economic position that it was in right after World War I. But people wondered, was this a cycle of the economy? Should he even intervene since it is a capitalist society? It turns out he didn't do a bad job. Around the 1930s, a lot of things changed, along with the government and people's economic status. People were getting their jobs back, but there was still a massive unemployment percentage in the United States. FDR might not have fixed anything, but the changes sure did come over time. Back in Europe, fascism was more popular than ever, with leaders like Mussolini of Italy and Hitler of Germany taking over their countries in a totalitarian way. These dictators declared war on America right after America declared war on Japan, which I'll get into in a second. Hitler and Mussolini sought European conquest because they drew the short end of the straw when it came to the Treaty of Versailles. It created inflation and crippled their military. Germany was in debt and needed money more than ever, so they needed land, because land is money. So, Hitler and Mussolini began to take over that region of the world. The leaders of France and England did little to stop these dictators from what they were doing, giving them no more than just a slap on the wrist. The United States wanted to stay as neutral as long as possible to avoid another unnecessary war. But that December, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The Japanese were going through their own sort of depression. They didn't have any land, so they didn't have any natural resources, so they couldn't trade with anybody. The only way the Japanese could win was quick and decisively, knowing America could outproduce them in any war supplies. America's economy was bouncing back and it had the resources, but Japan had the better military. The attack on Pearl Harbor wasn't as successful as the Japanese wanted it to be. America was forced into no choice but to wage war against the Japanese in the Pacific Theater. As if America didn't have any more problems, they went off to Europe to help their allies fight Nazi tyranny and fascism. For the people back home, this war was different. This war was for morals. This war was to fight pure human evil. And yes, it does exist, personified in the form of Adolf Hitler. Something of theirs had been destroyed, and they weren't going to let any other country take over their homeland. America outproduced every other country that was involved in the war. Propaganda was plastered all over American walls and buildings. People made daily sacrifices to help the men overseas. This war completely reshaped the American life. Like in World War I, women weren't allowed to fight, but what they did do was work for the Red Cross and work the men's jobs at home, creating supplies and tanks and weapons and all that jazz. Also, for the first time, minority groups like African Americans had the chance to fight in this war. The war ended April 1945. Racism and anti-Semitism were predominant in Nazi territory. The Nazis set up organized killing camps or concentration camps to place Jewish people in an attempt to commit genocide. Over 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. This was known as Hitler's final solution. And if an entire race of people are a problem, and the solution is to kill them, I don't know what human evil is. After the war ended, they had nowhere to go. So the United Kingdom created the Nation of Israel. After the war was over, the Nazi war criminals were tried in an international court which would later become the United Nations. With the war over and no other common enemies, the Soviet Union and America were back to being rivals again. They went back to their ideological differences. This marked the beginning of the Cold War. But the war was not over yet. America still had the Pacific Theater to finish. This war was ended devastatingly with the drop of the atomic bomb on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is probably America's most controversial war move. President Truman said it was the easiest decision he ever had to make. We killed hundreds of thousands of Japanese civilians and destroyed 2 major cities. But were we right in doing so? Could there have been a better way to end the war? Does this make us the bad guys? Were we different from Hitler in killing innocent civilians? Does that make us evil?